A federal judge speaking out, warning of the death threats he's received after ruling against President Trump. U.S. District Judge John McConnell, who is my next guest, says after he extended a temporary ban on the Trump administration's attempts to freeze trillions in federal spending, the threats began. One of them was a pizza delivery sent to his home, put under the name of Daniel Anderl. That's the name of U.S. District Court Judge Esther Salas's son, who was killed in 2020 when a man targeting the judge showed up at her home and opened fire. Since Judge McConnell ruled against the Trump administration, U.S. Marshals have identified at least 6 credible death threats against him. His wife and daughter have also been targeted. This is one instance that's part of a disturbing increase in threats to judges all across the country.
It's Ben, and I wasn't ready for what came out today. Congress has officially filed impeachment resolutions citing Trump's attacks on judges and threats to judicial independence as grounds for removal, turning his own weapon against him. The formal charges are now on record, marking a dramatic constitutional confrontation. The judiciary's war with Trump has now become the basis for his potential removal. The walls are closing in faster than ever. The irony is almost too rich to comprehend. The man who spent years calling for the impeachment of judges who ruled against his interests now finds himself staring down the barrel of impeachment precisely because of those attacks. The judiciary that Trump sought to bully and intimidate has found powerful defenders in Congress, and those defenders are wielding the Constitution's most potent weapon to protect judicial independence from presidential overreach. This is the moment when the separation of powers doctrine comes alive, when the checks and balances designed by the Founding Fathers actually function as intended.
Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts issued a rare but not unprecedented statement today following President Trump's call for a federal district judge who ruled against the administration to be impeached. Roberts said, quote, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose," unquote. CBS News Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford is here. Jan, how important is this?
It's important. I mean, this is a serious issue for the Chief Justice and has been for some time. Remember, it was just in December when he actually, I think, was even stronger in some of that language in his annual year-end report when he said attempts to intimidate judges, such as by calling for their impeachment, are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed. And why is that? Because it undermines people's confidence in the judicial system, but it also potentially is dangerous for judges and their security.
Representative Al Green and other Democratic members of Congress have been aggressively pushing these impeachment resolutions, holding press events, posting on social media, and making clear that Congress has both the authority and the obligation to respond to Trump's war on the courts. These are not amateur efforts or symbolic gestures. These are formal congressional filings that have gone through proper channels, documented with specific references to Trump's attacks on judges, and argued with the precision that only experienced legislators and their legal counsel can provide. The timing of these impeachment filings is anything but coincidental. Trump's rhetoric toward judges has escalated dramatically, with the former president calling for the impeachment of specific judges who blocked parts of his deportation agenda and other policy initiatives. When Judge James Boasberg ruled against Trump's immigration policies, Trump didn't simply criticize the decision. He called for Boasberg's impeachment, demanded consequences for a judge who was simply doing his job, and created a dangerous precedent where judges who rule against the executive face personal punishment.
President Trump today called for the impeachment of a federal judge who directed flights carrying Venezuelan migrants to be turned around in what has become a contentious battle with the administration. As we reported over the weekend, President Trump deported some 300 alleged Venezuelan gang members to a mega prison in El Salvador. A judge then ordered that the flight should not leave, but the White House argued that the planes had already taken off. Earlier this morning, President Trump, in a post on Truth Social, decried the U.S. District Court judge as a troublemaker and agitator. He said that they were an appointee of former President Obama and suggested that he did not have the same authority as Trump because he was not elected. Trump saying in part, quote, "I am just doing what the voters wanted me to do. This judge, like many of the crooked judges I am forced to appear before, should be impeached, end quote. Officials say the judge is unlikely to be impeached, as it would require a majority in the House and a two-thirds majority in the Senate.
This systematic attack on judicial independence has real-world consequences that extend far beyond mere rhetoric. The federal courts have documented an alarming spike in threats against judges who have ruled against Trump's agenda. Bomb threats have been called into courthouses. Swatting incidents have targeted judges' homes, sending armed police to residences of judicial officers and their families. Death threats have poured in against judges and their loved ones, creating an atmosphere of fear that fundamentally undermines the ability of courts to function impartially. Legal experts have drawn a direct line connecting Trump's inflammatory language to this wave of violence and intimidation. When the former president calls a judge a radical lunatic, when he demands the impeachment of jurists who disagree with him, when he refuses to accept court orders and labels judges as corrupt or biased, he creates a permission structure for violent extremists to act on their worst impulses. Those who admire Trump and share his grievances see his attacks as validation for their own threats, believing they're defending the nation against an illegitimate judiciary.
The president's war against the judicial branch continues overnight. He shared an extensive post on social media criticizing judges who rule against him. In one instance, calling a judge wacky and crooked. Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Avajoy Burnett is live in our newsroom. And Avajoy, in his series of grievances against the entire U.S. court system, he took aim at one judge in particular, made a lot of allegations, and called for his removal. What was that really about?
Well, Del, this is all coming after a loss to the administration on Friday. On Friday, Judge James Boasberg rejected a plan from the DOJ to continue with an investigation against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. And this is something that President Trump was not happy about. He spoke about it extensively in that post on social media over the weekend, calling Judge James Boasberg wacky, out of control, and saying he is exactly what judges should not be.
The Supreme Court itself has been forced to weigh in on this crisis, an extraordinary development that underscores just how serious the situation has become. Chief Justice John Roberts, who rarely comments on political matters, issued a public statement condemning Trump's threats to impeach judges based on their rulings. Roberts made clear that judges should never face political consequences for their decisions, that judicial independence is fundamental to the rule of law, and that attacks on the judiciary represent a threat to constitutional governance. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson also issued a statement emphasizing the importance of protecting judicial independence in the face of political attacks. Having two Supreme Court justices go on the record condemning the former president's conduct is virtually unprecedented. The highest court in the land does not normally intervene in political disputes, but Trump's assault on the judiciary has compelled even the most cautious justices to speak out against what they perceive as a genuine threat to the constitutional order. The New York Bar Association and other professional organizations of lawyers have also condemned Trump's rhetoric, warning that calls for judicial impeachment based on disagreement with rulings represent an attack on the very foundations of American jurisprudence. These bar associations represent thousands of attorneys who understand that an independent judiciary is essential to the functioning of our legal system, and they're not remaining silent while the president wages war on the courts. Congress has taken these warnings seriously, and the impeachment resolutions reflect a genuine institutional concern about the survival of judicial independence. The members filing these resolutions aren't simply engaging in political grandstanding. They're responding to what judges, legal experts, bar associations, and even Supreme Court justices have identified as a genuine crisis in the relationship between the executive branch and the judiciary. This is Congress exercising its constitutional role as a check on presidential power. The specific impeachment resolutions document Trump's attacks in detail, citing his calls for the impeachment of judges who rule against him, his demands for consequences against jurists who stand in his way, and his repeated denigration of federal judges as biased or corrupt. The resolutions argue that this conduct constitutes abuse of power, a threat to separation of powers, and grounds for removal from office under the constitutional standard of high crimes and misdemeanors. This is not merely about Trump being rude or politically incorrect in his criticism of judges. The Constitution allows for vigorous political debate, including criticism of judicial decisions. But Trump's conduct has crossed a fundamental line by demanding that judges face personal consequences for rulings he disagrees with. That's not criticism, that's intimidation. That's an attempt to bend the judiciary to the will of the executive. And that's exactly what the Constitution's impeachment power was designed to address. The documented connection between Trump's rhetoric and actual violence against judges makes this situation even more urgent. When judges receive death threats after Trump attacks them by name, when courthouses receive bomb threats after Trump calls for judicial impeachment, the line between words and consequences disappears. Congress is responding to this connection, treating Trump's inflammatory language not merely as offensive, but as dangerous, as conduct that threatens the functioning of our entire legal system. The political calculus surrounding these impeachment resolutions is fascinating to observe. Even though removal from office is extremely unlikely given the current political landscape, the act of filing impeachment papers matters enormously. Impeachment creates a formal record of congressional findings, a documented history of what Congress believes constitutes impeachable conduct. This record will exist forever, shaping historical understanding of Trump's presidency and the appropriate boundaries of presidential conduct. Impeachment also signals to judges that Congress takes their independence seriously, that there are institutional defenders willing to push back against executive intimidation. This matters for judicial morale and for the willingness of judges to make difficult decisions that might displease powerful political figures. When judges know that Congress will respond to attacks on the judiciary, they're more likely to rule based on law rather than fear of retaliation. The pressure that impeachment places on Republicans is significant, even if they ultimately vote against removal. Every Republican member of Congress will have to explain to their constituents why they're not voting to remove a president who's called for the impeachment of judges who rule against him. Every Republican will have to justify their position when their constituents see threats and violence against judges increasing. This is not a comfortable position for any elected official. The momentum for these impeachment resolutions appears to be growing as Trump continues his attacks on judges and as the consequences of his rhetoric become clearer. If Trump escalates, if he makes more explicit threats, if there are more acts of violence against judges, Congress will likely file additional impeachment papers. Each new resolution documents additional misconduct, strengthens the case for removal, and keeps the issue alive in the public consciousness. Section 2. The constitutional stakes here could not be higher, and what we're witnessing is nothing less than a fundamental test of American democracy. The question at the heart of these impeachment proceedings is whether a president can attack judges with impunity or whether Congress will hold that president accountable for attacks on judicial independence. This is about whether the rule of law means anything when the most powerful person in the nation is the one violating it. And the answer that Congress seems to be delivering is that no one, not even a former president, is above the Constitution's constraints. Trump's systematic assault on judges started early and has been relentless in its intensity. He has called judges radical, biased, corrupt, and activist whenever their rulings have displeased him. He has attacked specific judges by name, demanded their impeachment, and encouraged his allies to echo those attacks. His allies have called for defunding courts, for punishing judges who stand in Trump's way, for treating judicial decisions that Trump disagrees with as illegitimate acts that deserve consequences. This goes far beyond normal political criticism. The American political tradition has always included robust debate about judicial decisions, but that debate has generally respected the independence of the judiciary. Presidents and politicians have criticized rulings they disagreed with, while acknowledging that judges have the authority to make those decisions. Trump has shattered that tradition by treating judicial rulings he disagrees with as acts of war, as decisions that deserve punishment, as reasons for impeachment. The specific cases that have triggered Trump's fury are revealing in their scope. When Judge James Boasberg blocked parts of Trump's deportation agenda, Trump didn't simply criticize the legal reasoning. He called for Boasberg's impeachment, demanded that the judge face consequences, and created a chilling message for every other judge considering rulings against Trump's policies. The message was unmistakable. Rule against me, and I will try to destroy your career. Trump's response to unfavorable court orders has followed a consistent pattern. He attacks the judge personally, questions their legitimacy and motives, demands their impeachment, and encourages his supporters to see the judge as an enemy. This pattern is not random or spontaneous. It's a calculated strategy to intimidate judges, to make them think twice before ruling against Trump, to create a climate where the cost of opposing the executive is simply too high for most judges to bear. The consequences of this strategy have been devastating for judicial independence. Judges who never sought political prominence suddenly find themselves the targets of presidential attacks, subjected to death threats, swatting incidents, and other forms of intimidation. Their families are threatened. Their homes are targeted. Their ability to do their jobs is fundamentally compromised by the fear that Trump's rhetoric has created. Law enforcement authorities have documented the spike in threats against judges who have ruled against Trump's agenda. Bomb threats have disrupted courthouse operations. Swatting incidents have sent armed police to judges' homes, creating terrifying situations for judicial families. Death threats have poured in through mail, phone calls, and social media. And in every instance, the pattern is the same. The threats spike immediately after Trump attacks the judge by name. The connection between Trump's rhetoric and this violence is not merely correlational, it's causal. Those who carry out these threats are explicit about their motivations. They refer to Trump's attacks on the judges. They echo his language about radical lunatics and corrupt activists. They believe they're defending the nation against an illegitimate judiciary because Trump has told them that's exactly what's happening. Trump has given them permission to act on their worst impulses. This is why Congress has responded with impeachment resolutions. The members filing these papers understand that words have consequences, that presidential rhetoric can create real danger, and that the Constitution requires them to respond when the executive branch threatens the independence of the judiciary. They're not overreacting. They're fulfilling their constitutional duty to protect the separation of powers from executive overreach. House Resolution 415 represents the first formal impeachment filing focused on Trump's attacks on the judiciary. This resolution documents Trump's authoritarianism and his denigration of federal judges, arguing that this conduct constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors. The resolution cites specific attacks, specific calls for impeachment, and specific instances where Trump has attempted to intimidate courts and judges. It's a detailed indictment of Trump's war on judicial independence. House Resolution 537 followed months later, representing a second formal impeachment filing focused on the same conduct. This resolution reinforces the arguments made in the first filing, documents additional attacks, and strengthens the case for removal. The fact that multiple resolutions have been filed on this issue demonstrates the seriousness with which Congress is treating Trump's conduct toward the judiciary. Representative Al Green has been at the forefront of this effort, publicly pushing these resolutions and making clear that Congress has both the authority and the obligation to respond to Trump's attacks on judges. Green has held press events announcing new impeachment filings, posted on social media about the importance of protecting judicial independence, and argued that Trump's conduct gravely endangers separation of powers and the rule of law. The bar associations that have weighed in on this issue bring professional credibility to the case against Trump. These organizations represent thousands of attorneys who understand the importance of judicial independence. They're not acting as partisan political operatives. They're acting as guardians of the legal profession, warning that Trump's attacks on judges threaten the fundamental principles that make our legal system function. The Supreme Court's involvement in this controversy is perhaps the most telling indicator of how serious the situation has become. Chief Justice Roberts rarely comments on political matters, preferring to let the court's rulings speak for themselves. But Roberts felt compelled to speak out about Trump's threats to impeach judges, making clear that such conduct is unacceptable and threatens the independence of the judiciary. Justice Jackson's statement echoed Roberts' concerns, emphasizing the importance of protecting judicial independence in the face of political attacks. Having multiple Supreme Court justices publicly condemning the president's conduct is virtually unprecedented and demonstrates the depth of concern within the judiciary about Trump's attacks. The institutional response to Trump's war on judges has been remarkable in its breadth and consistency. Judges, bar associations, and Congress have all spoken out against Trump's conduct. The judiciary has defended its independence. The legal profession has defended its core values, and Congress has begun the process of using its constitutional powers to hold Trump accountable. The political dynamics of this situation are complex and evolving. Even though removal from office remains politically unlikely, the impeachment process itself serves important functions. It documents presidential misconduct. It creates a formal record for history. It sends a message to the executive branch about the limits of presidential power. And it puts pressure on members of Congress to take a stand on fundamental constitutional principles. The momentum for impeachment appears to be growing as Trump continues his attacks on judges and as the consequences of his rhetoric become clearer. Each new attack, each new threat against a judge, each new instance of violence connected to Trump's rhetoric strengthens the case for removal. The connection between Trump's words and real-world consequences is becoming impossible to ignore. What we're witnessing is a constitutional confrontation of historic proportions, one that will be studied for generations as a test of whether American democratic institutions can withstand a sustained assault from the executive branch. The impeachment resolutions filed by Congress represent not just political opposition to Trump, but institutional resistance to executive overreach. Congress is asserting its constitutional role as a check on presidential power, defending judicial independence against an executive who has declared war on the courts. The constitutional framework that the Founding Fathers established was designed precisely for moments like this. They understood that executive power could threaten judicial independence, that presidents might try to intimidate or punish judges who ruled against them. That's why they established an independent judiciary with life tenure, protected judges from salary reductions, and gave Congress the power of impeachment as a check on executive overreach. They didn't anticipate every threat to judicial independence, but they built a system capable of responding to those threats. The impeachment power is Congress's most potent weapon in defending the separation of powers. When the executive branch overreaches, when the president threatens the independence of another branch of government, Congress has the constitutional authority to respond with impeachment. This is not a political weapon to be used against political opponents. It's a constitutional tool designed to protect the system of checks and balances from executive aggrandizement. Trump's attacks on judges represent precisely the kind of conduct that the impeachment power was designed to address. By calling for the impeachment of judges who rule against him, by demanding that they face consequences, by fueling threats and violence against the judiciary, Trump has fundamentally threatened the independence of the judicial branch. Congress is responding to that threat with the constitutional remedy that the Founding Fathers provided. The specific impeachment resolutions document this threat in meticulous detail. They cite Trump's specific attacks on specific judges. They reference his calls for impeachment based on disagreement with rulings. They document his denigration of federal judges and his attempts to delegitimize the judiciary. And they argue that this conduct constitutes abuse of power, a threat to separation of powers, and grounds for removal from office. The fact that these resolutions have been filed by multiple members of Congress in multiple sessions demonstrates the seriousness with which Congress is treating this issue. This is not a one-time political stunt. It's a sustained institutional response to a continuing threat to judicial independence. As Trump continues his attacks, Congress continues to respond with additional impeachment filings. The role of Representative Al Green in this effort has been particularly significant. Green has been a consistent voice for impeachment based on Trump's attacks on judges. He has filed resolutions, held press events, and made clear that Congress has a constitutional obligation to respond to presidential threats against the judiciary. Green's persistence has kept the issue alive and forced other members of Congress to take positions on whether Trump's conduct warrants impeachment. The broader context of these impeachment efforts includes widespread concern about the state of judicial independence in America. Judges at every level have reported feeling intimidated by political attacks, concerned about threats to their safety, and worried about the long-term health of the judiciary. The attacks on judges by Trump and his allies have created an atmosphere of fear that undermines the willingness of judges to make difficult decisions. Legal experts have warned that Trump's attacks on judges represent a fundamental threat to the rule of law. When judges are afraid to rule against the executive, when they fear personal consequences for their decisions, the entire legal system breaks down. Cases are decided based on political considerations rather than legal principles. Justice becomes a matter of pleasing the powerful rather than applying the law impartially. And the constitutional system that depends on an independent judiciary begins to crumble. The threats and violence against judges that have followed Trump's rhetoric are not abstract concerns. They're real, documented, and escalating. Bomb threats have emptied courthouses and disrupted judicial proceedings. Swatting incidents have sent armed police to judges' homes, creating terrifying situations for families. Death threats have forced judges to take extraordinary security precautions and live in fear for their safety and the safety of their loved ones. The connection between Trump's rhetoric and this violence has been clearly established. Threat reports spike after Trump attacks specific judges. Those making threats explicitly reference Trump's language about radical lunatics and corrupt activists. They believe they're acting on Trump's behalf, defending the nation against an illegitimate judiciary. Trump has created a permission structure for violence against judges, and that violence is now occurring with alarming frequency. The Supreme Court's intervention in this controversy has been remarkable. Chief Justice Roberts, who has carefully guarded the court's institutional neutrality, felt compelled to speak out against Trump's threats to impeach judges. Justice Jackson issued her own statement emphasizing the importance of judicial independence. These statements represent the judiciary's institutional response to the threat Trump poses, a warning that the attacks cannot continue without fundamentally undermining the legal system. The bar associations that have condemned Trump's rhetoric add professional weight to the case against him. These organizations represent tens of thousands of attorneys who understand the importance of judicial independence. Their statements against Trump are not political. They're professional warnings that the president's attacks on judges threaten the foundational principles of the legal profession. The next steps in this constitutional drama remain uncertain but likely. As Trump continues his attacks on judges, Congress will probably file additional impeachment resolutions. Each new resolution will document additional misconduct and strengthen the case for removal. The momentum for impeachment is likely to grow as the connection between Trump's rhetoric and actual violence becomes increasingly undeniable. The political consequences of these impeachment efforts extend beyond the immediate question of removal. Even if removal remains unlikely, the impeachment process itself serves important functions. It creates a formal record of congressional findings about presidential misconduct. It signals to judges that Congress supports their independence. It puts pressure on Republicans to explain their support for a president who threatens the judiciary. And it keeps the issue alive in public debate. The constitutional significance of what's happening cannot be overstated. We're witnessing a test of whether American democratic institutions can withstand a sustained assault from the executive branch. Congress is using its impeachment power to defend judicial independence. The courts are warning about the consequences of executive attacks. The legal profession is speaking out against threats to the rule of law. All three branches of government are engaged in a fundamental debate about the limits of presidential power. This moment will be studied by historians and legal scholars for generations. It will be examined as a case study in how constitutional systems respond to executive overreach, how institutions defend themselves against attacks, and how the separation of powers functions in times of crisis. The outcome of this confrontation will shape the future of American democracy, determining whether presidents can attack judges with impunity or whether the Constitution's checks and balances will hold. The bottom line is this: Trump has waged a systematic war on the judiciary, calling for the impeachment of judges who rule against him, fueling threats and violence against the courts, and fundamentally threatening judicial independence. Congress has responded by filing formal impeachment resolutions that cite this conduct as grounds for removal. The Supreme Court and bar associations have condemned Trump's attacks, and the momentum for impeachment is likely to grow as the consequences of Trump's rhetoric become clearer. This is a major constitutional moment where Congress is defending judicial independence against presidential attack. Stay tuned, because this story is going to continue as Congress pushes forward with impeachment based on Trump's war on the judiciary.